it's recording, so I pause it, but
Good. All right. And I just started it. So we'll just have to remember, you help me remember, we have to tell everybody we're recording.
okay.
It's early.
Do you want to pause it until we're starting?
I'm sure I can do that. That's not it. Hang on.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Free to interrupt and remind me anytime. We are recording this meeting. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Jamie Caplan, and my firm, Jamie Caplan Consulting, was hired by the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency to update your hazard mitigation plan. We're under contract with the state to update or write 14 plans throughout the Commonwealth. And we've put together a team of 4 people. David Murphy is on the phone with us today. We also have Darren Punchard, who's functioning as our deputy project manager. Some of you met him yesterday. And Bill Bond as well, who is leading our risk assessment effort. We do work, we've done a lot of work on plans in the state as well as nationwide, but mitigation planning is certainly a specialty of ours. For those of you who were participating in the meeting yesterday, today's meeting is in less detail and more generally informative, and will guide you through the process of how we develop a hazard mitigation plan, kind of in a fairly easy way, and gives you a chance to participate. So hazard mitigation are actions that you can take to minimize risk to people or property and to the environment. Our plan will focus on natural hazards, and that's a requirement that FEMA has. Well, in fact, they prioritize natural hazards. They don't require us to include hazards that are not natural. And just some general information about mitigation. When you invest in hazard mitigation, you're saving money most likely. For every $1 spent on mitigation, you're saving $6 in future disaster losses. So we're talking about things like if you spend money to put in a culvert that will manage water flow, as opposed to don't put in a large enough culvert and have a road washout. It's significantly less expensive to put in the proper culvert than to replace it and fix a roadway that's washed out and suffer sort of longer term economic impacts to that, like people can't get to work, that kind of thing. So that's what hazard mitigation is in general. And we see hazard mitigation, the plan we develop, I should say, will identify cost-effective actions that the town can use to reduce risk. So we're looking at things that are relevant and reasonable for you to implement. Focus on your greatest vulnerabilities. For instance, we know you can have earthquakes, and even had one not too long ago, but the chance of having a large earthquake that causes huge amounts of damage is fairly small. That wouldn't be a place to put lots of money. That being said, all hazards preparedness or activities you can take to mitigate risk that cover all hazards tend to be effective use of your money. We will encourage and have encouraged you to build partnerships with other organizations and towns. Your disasters cross town boundaries, and we want to make sure that you're mitigating risk across those boundaries. I think that the planning process, just going through the process of developing a hazard mitigation plan, will increase awareness of risks and hazards in the town. Those of you who work in emergency management or in certain areas of the town, you're very aware of it, whereas members of the public may not be as aware. And by having meetings such as this, it's a way to increase that awareness. The plan will communicate the priorities of the town. So it's FEMA requires certain elements of the plan be included, but they don't specify what the priorities are. Those are unique to Wendell. And that's part of why we communicate as much and as closely as we can with you, as well as review as many planning documents as we can that are existing in the town. So we align with other town objectives and communicate the priorities of the town. And finally, most important is the planning process, and the plan itself, when implemented, really will save lives and save money, and it will help the town be eligible. It makes you eligible for FEMA pre-disaster hazard mitigation funding. So just a general, really basic slide about emergency management. Emergency management tends to have these four buckets, as you see in circles here. Preparedness are things like flashlights and first aid kits and things that you do when you know the disaster is imminent, it's coming. Whether you're gonna turn up your heat or get gas for the generator, that kind of thing, that's preparedness. Response, very self-explanatory. That's, fire engines, police cars, you're going to a disaster and dealing with it, it's there. Recovery is putting your life back together following the disaster. But mitigation is what our plan is about, and that's what you want to do before a disaster so you don't have a disaster. So the focus is things like heavy rains. Heavy rains can cause flooding, but if we can do something to not have the flooding, that's mitigation. That's what we're looking for, is how do we identify those kinds of activities, put them in your plan, and have you get some funding to do those activities. We can't stop the rain, but we don't have to have the flooding. All right, and that mitigation funding from FEMA, it tends to come from one of these three grant programs that I've listed on the left-hand side of your slide. Most of them would probably come from the BRIC funding. That's the first one listed, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. And Congress has made more money available through BRIC than ever before, and it's increasing. So, and they've committed to continuing that funding. So mitigation has become a real priority for the White House and Congress, which is a good thing for those of us in emergency management. And we certainly would rather see money put into mitigation than just response and recovery. And let's prevent these disasters from happening if we can. And the list in blue, these are just some of the types of projects that we may look for. They're not, it's not an all-inclusive list, it's just food for thought. All right, and then developing your plan, you will have a 2022 hazard mitigation plan. It's an update to your 2016 hazard mitigation plan. So we're reviewing that plan from 2016 very carefully. We're also taking into consideration the state hazard mitigation and climate adaptation plan from 2018. The state is in the process, just the early stages of revamping and developing a new update for that plan. But I was actively involved in the development of the 2018 plan, as was Darren Punchard, who's on our team. So I think that's to your advantage. It's a FEMA requirement that your plan, the local plan, be consistent with the state level plan. So you'll see that's something that we talk about throughout, and we'll make sure of it. And then your municipal vulnerability preparedness plan, or your MVP, is very recent, from 2021. And that has a number of recommendations in it that can be considered. Some of them, most of them, are mitigation actions. They're activities that you can take to adapt to climate change, and many of them also to hazards. So what we want to do is make sure this 2022 plan is your latest, greatest. We're taking into account what work you've done previously, and to develop this plan.
Jamie, quick question. Do we have that municipal vulnerability preparedness plan in place now?
You do.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Yeah, you do. And you're eligible for that MVP funding, state funding. So that's something to pay attention to. And I can help you with that a little bit if you like. All right. Other questions? Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask something? All right, I'm going to keep going, but by all means, you're welcome to at any time. So one of the first things that we do, I'm going to guide you through this process of kind of how we go about developing a plan, is we look at who is in Wendell. And if you could, on your screen, type in some of these answers, who lives there? Not, Phil, but do we have any young people, old people? Does anybody have disabilities? Does anybody not speak English? Right, families. We want to take into account first the people who live there and work there. You can type anything in you want. There are no right or wrong answers.
Where do we type that in, Amy?
You should be able to just type it right on your screen.
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
We,
On the Menti screen.
On your Menti screen, you should be able to type it in.
Oh, okay. I was at the presentation screen.
Sorry, that's my bad. I should have mentioned, you can just go stay at the Menti screen. You'll be okay. All right, farmers, that's a good addition. People of all ages, but mostly older, and some who are multicultural. Good. Just give a few minutes in case anybody else wants to type in anything. Seniors is a good one and important.
Jamie, are we able to add additional responses?
I think you can add up to 3 of your own, but it may be that you can add unlimited. And if you can't, then you can just shout them out.
I was going to say people new to Wendell.
Oh, I
Newer
like that. Post office employees, that's a good one. All right. I'm going to keep going, but just so you know, this is one of our first steps. And one thing that we've done as a consulting team, techies who work from home. I do not work from home any longer, but I can certainly appreciate that. And with COVID, we have so many people who work from home now. Oh, thank you that the open space has good demographic information. That's good.
I was just
Yes.
one more multi-generational.
Okay, good.
And a word, I can't get back onto type again, Jamie, but diversity in population is a pretty frequent reoccurring theme for Wendell.
Good. All right. Yeah, and somebody mentioned multicultural. All right, so one of the first things that we've done, and we can update this, but as a consulting team, one of the first things we did was look to the town, and Phil is our contact person in the town, as many of you know, and come up with who should be part of this Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee. So as a consulting team, we're very good at asking the right questions, but you have the answers. And so we want to make sure that as we work through the planning process, we really are including the right decision makers and people who have the most knowledge of Wendell and what your needs are. So that's what this committee has been formed to do. And the committee's meeting at least 4 times through the planning process. And they're helping us identify data as well as just information sources and as we move forward also with mitigation actions and ideas. So we've got that. All right, beyond people, let's talk about buildings, organization, or infrastructure that all of those people rely upon. What's in Wendell that you absolutely need? What's critical to Wendell? The library is a good answer. Does the library have a generator? I don't remember. It does. Okay, thank you for the thumbs up. General store, town hall, fire department, town garage, town offices, country store, broadband, and you have broadband now is my understanding. Drinking water, yes, good one.
Electricity, is that kind of infrastructure?
Yeah, yeah.
Roads.
Roads are key. And your bridges. It came up on a meeting yesterday. There are 3 or 4 bridges to get, you have to cross a bridge to get out of or into Wendell. Okay, National Grid substation, we talked about that quite a bit.
Good Neighbors is the food pantry service.
Food pantry. We've certainly seen the food pantries become more and more relevant in communities and necessary with COVID. Glad you mentioned the senior center, municipal water, emergency services. Awesome, good list, good. All right, I'm gonna keep going. I know it's not all inclusive, but it's a good start and gives you a sense of what we're looking at and talking about. So this is our initial list. It is not complete. We did make some changes to it yesterday and I did not get to update this slide, but we're looking for a list of critical facilities. So that's, we identify the people, then we want to identify your infrastructure, your buildings, what the town owns, as well as not things that the town doesn't own, but may consider critical, such as those stores, even the state forest. So now that we know about who's there and what's there, I want to know what weather hazards threaten these people, buildings, and infrastructure. What kinds of things can happen there, natural hazards primarily, to impact any of these? You can make the biggest list you can. Tornadoes, ice, snow, good. High winds, perfect. And you've been having more high winds. I think we all have seen an increase in that. Extreme weather, heavy rain, big fluctuations in air temperature, and that's killing the roads. Ice storms, high winds. Good, heavy rains, lightning, snow, ice, drought. Yeah, Massachusetts has really experienced drought. Storms that knock out electricity, flooding that can wash out roads, and any weather that damages crops. That's a good one. I once had a farmer call me and say, there is salt water in my field, and what are you going to do about it? I was like, oh, I can address it in your plan. Okay. So this is our list of hazards, and the list on the right under natural hazards, obviously earthquake and hazardous materials are not natural, but this is our laundry list of hazards, if you will. And we've organized it by primary climate change interaction. And we've done that because that's how the state plan looks at this list of hazards. And we, as I mentioned to you before, we really want to make sure we're consistent with the state plan. And we see climate change as exacerbating some of these hazards and their impacts or frequency. So it makes the most sense in terms of your planning process and in terms of it getting reviewed, that it be managed and organized in this way. Does anybody have any comments about these hazards, or if you want to unmute yourself and say anything about the hazards? Does it look like we have everything included?
I have a weird one.
Go for it.
But, well, it seemed like in January, we came perilously close to having some of the basic aspects of the federal government kind of collapse, like the premise of democracy and whatnot. So I don't know what that would mean if, certain
If
forces have been
democracy
successful.
collapses.
Yeah, if democracy collapses, what happens to FEMA,
Okay, I'm definitely not able to answer that. And I'm as
Jamie?
scared as you are. And it's a little beyond the scope of this plan.
Thought maybe.
So, I don't know. I mean, maybe human nature is a natural disaster. And can be, but we're gonna kind of stick with these things. I think that if we do see things like government interruption, we'll say, or democracy collapsing, that would exacerbate any of these issues. If you had to fight a big flood or fire and government was in disarray, that would cause, it would be harder. But it's definitely not something that we'll cover in the plan. Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think we forgot to type this into the list, but the one thing that we've had to endure was a huge tree falling on our barn because of high wind. That was that SIES hurricane 2 or 3 years ago. And so high wind that causes trees to fall on your house.
That is a big one. And high winds.
That's a big one for us.
Yes, high winds are a big one, and high winds are a big one in New England. And anything that we can do to prevent trees from falling on homes, wires, etc., is something that we want to do. And I agree with you, it's huge. We even see it with microbursts. I live in Northampton. I think I forgot to mention that to you, but East Hampton had a microburst years ago, and you can still see that impact up on Mount Tom. Kimberly, you want to ask a question or say something?
Sure. In terms of the hazards, flooding, are you going to include a discussion of erosion, fluvial erosion hazards in there?
Yes.
Great. And the other thought I had was under technological and human caused hazards, cyber security and cyber attacks.
Yeah, that's something that has come up in all of the meetings we've had with Wendell. The concern for cyber attacks, it won't be covered in any big detail. It's beyond the scope of typical mitigation planning. I think it came up yesterday too. It's not something that we have the expertise to guide you in how to mitigate the risk of a cyber threat. I think I probably know the basics just like all of you, but I don't have the expertise in that. And it's not something that FEMA will look for in terms of approving the plan. But those are good points.
For infectious diseases, is this just like tick-borne and mosquito-borne diseases, or is it a broader category?
It can be broader. It does include invasive species, like they sort of overlap a little bit. So yeah, it can be as broad as you want it to be.
Great.
Did you have
Thank
something
you.
specific in mind that we should add or cover?
Well, I know that the plans that the Franklin Regional Council of Government works on, we have a section on tick and mosquito-borne diseases. I mean, I understand your point about what is FEMA going to cover, or what do they consider a eligible mitigation project that they would fund. But you know, that's always changing, as we've seen with the new brick program. So
Right.
sometimes it's a good approach to kind of cast a wide net. So
Yeah.
um,
I agree with you. We will include infectious diseases and as many as we can cover, you know, and think of. The same with like your invasive species. We'll mention everything that we're aware of. We'll review the FERCog documents that we have access to. So, and we'll of course then give you all the chance to review the plan. So if you've got things that don't get included, then you'll be able to let us know and we can cover that, because I want to make sure that we do include everything that you can think of.
great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Other thoughts on the list of hazards or questions? All right, we'll keep going. So this is a draft map. I know the Wendell State Forest is larger than this. The map is not done, but it's just to give you a sense of what we're going to do. So we will map your critical facilities, the buildings and infrastructure that you mentioned, along with some that we added. And we'll also overlay that with things like the floodplain. So we can identify, oh, if you have a critical facility in a floodplain, maybe that's something you need to address. So we will have those layers of maps. And when we have our next public meeting, the maps will be complete and I'll be able to show you all of them. So just in general, this is kind of like what I was just explaining. We take that list of natural hazards and your critical facilities, and we want to combine them to be able to understand risk. And once we have an understanding of what the potential damage is, what the potential losses are, we can begin to think about how can we mitigate those risks. So that gets me to my next question for you, which is, how do you think we can mitigate those risks? What can we do to protect people, buildings, and infrastructure from these hazards? So like Chris, you mentioned the tree falling on the house or barn. What are we going to do so that doesn't happen? That's hazard mitigation. What are we going to do to protect those buildings and infrastructure throughout the town so that we don't have disasters? We can't stop the heavy rains. We can't stop the winter storms or the high winds, but we don't have to have disasters. And I'll give you a few minutes, so write as many ideas as you want. No wrong answers. And I appreciate your participating, I should tell you that. Playing along with me. Good. The insurance provider offers checklists and protocol for best practices. Good. We could institute some of those. Absolutely. If you want to share the list with me, I will make sure that it gets into the plan. Tree trimming along power lines is key. Yes. And I think we can say that tree trimming in New England is controversial. On the one hand, you'll see the power companies clearing trees or branches only on one side of the road, which leaves the other side. And the other thing is trees are good in terms of high heat and extreme heat and providing shade. Plus, here we are in New England, we like our trees. We don't want to cut them down. And that's something to always consider. They can also cause huge problems. So yes, the tree warden can check the condition of roadside trees. That's a good one. Solar and battery backup is good. I know there's some talk about that. Appropriate size culverts at all road crossings is huge, and there's plenty of funding for that. So any of your culverts that need replacing, we want to put a good list together and make sure it's in this plan. And because you have your MVP plan, you can also get MVP funding for those culverts. Insect mitigation, removing old dams. good list. Anybody have anything else, or anybody want to unmute and add anything? All right. So this part of your plan is the most important part. So all that we've done up to now is really leading up to identifying these actions, or their mitigation actions. And we tend to classify mitigation actions into one of 4 categories. Local plans and regulations. This relates to planning how you, or regulating how you use land frequently, as well as any kind of disaster planning that you do, preserving open space, managing stormwater. Those local plans and regulations are all ways to mitigate risk. Structure and infrastructure projects. These are your typically large budget projects. So if you were going to elevate structures or move them, or underground utilities, those projects mitigate risk, putting in better culverts, but they're expensive. And they're usually the things that come to mind first. Natural systems protection is very important. And I think that we're beginning, really, I would say over the last, 5 to 10 years, to learn more about how to work with water, especially, and how we can protect the environment in ways that will also protect all of us. Restoring wetlands is a good one, managing forests. And then education and awareness programs, that can be things like meetings like this, where people begin to learn how they can mitigate risk on their own properties or businesses, and in the town. And there's so many ways to get the word out and educate people. Any questions about this list? It's not all inclusive, but it's pretty good.
I had a question about the undergrounding utilities. Is that,
go ahead.
how is that just for sort of private residences? Is that something that we could underground, the utilities, like the electric wires along the roads? Like, how far does that go?
So it's a general statement, but yes, undergrounding utilities is a good idea. Typically, I see in communities that in building codes, or not building codes, but in your zoning or development, if you were to put in a new subdivision, typically communities require that the power lines be underground. That's a way to address it. In a community that already has power lines above ground, it's crazy expensive to put them underground, and very hard to get funding for it. So
it's too bad, because we spend, well, especially out in California and stuff, they spend so much money to keep putting them back up that, to just do it would probably save money in the long term, but we're, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Chris, you had a question?
All right.
Chris, did you want to ask something?
This doesn't actually go on this list, but it's something I should have perhaps mentioned before, which is that the 2 largest shelter spaces in the town are the town hall and the meeting house. And while the meeting house has been unoccupied for 30 years, Phil Delory just issued a certificate of occupancy on the 1st of April. So we're delighted at that recognition that the rehab of the building is coming along. It has no plumbing yet, but eventually it will be a space where people can take refuge in severe situations. And then we'll have both the town hall and the meeting house as places where people can congregate during storms.
That's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. I wasn't aware of that. All right. Any other thoughts? So that's a bit about what our process is like. This is our timeline and the tasks that we've associated with updating the plan. As you can see here in April, we're having our first public meeting. We'll have another public meeting in July. At that time, the plan will be drafted and we'll be able to show those completed maps to you, as well as a list of mitigation actions. There will be still time for you to include any kind of comments or changes that should be made. I don't want you to think that you'll be out of time. You won't. Between now and sort of towards the middle of May, we'll finish up the risk assessment. We'll finish our maps. We'll be ready with a completed critical facility list and really focus attention 100% on developing your mitigation actions. And we'll do that in conjunction with your Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee. When the plan is nearing completion, you will have the chance to review it. It'll be posted online. Phil and I will figure out sort of where and how that's going to work. But you'll have at least 2 weeks to take a look at the plan. And then once the town is comfortable with the plan, it goes to the state for their review. I can't tell you how much time they'll take, but when they review the plan, if they've got any questions or comments, we go ahead and make those changes. And once the state emergency management agency is comfortable with the plan, they forward it directly to the federal emergency management agency for their review and approval. Once FEMA approves the plan, they'll send it back to the town and say it's approved pending your adoption. And at that time, the town has to formally adopt the plan. And I'll walk you through that process. And you have plenty of time to do it. So I just wanted to leave this for you to add any comments, questions, anything that you didn't get to ask. You can unmute yourself and do it. You can type it in. But anything else that's on your minds, I want to make sure to capture that. Daniel, you want to add something?
Sure. I know you mentioned the Town of Wendell Municipal Vulnerable Preparedness Program and its resiliency plan. And so prior to this meeting, I was reviewing that. And I was wondering if you would be able to incorporate by reference and also include it as an appendix in this plan that you're working on. Because a lot of work has already been done with the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, and there's been a lot of meetings and a lot of thought and recommendations, and there's basically spreadsheets and priorities identified, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. Yes. And I got to tell you, just in my personal opinion, the FERCOG did an amazing job with that plan. We are reviewing it carefully. It is very good. And to develop the list of mitigation actions for this plan, what we've done is taken a look at all that were listed in your previous plan, as well as all of the recommendations from the MVP plan, so that we're incorporating all of those recommendations that are relevant to hazard mitigation, which is 90% of them, if not all, into this plan. So it's being incorporated completely.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Chris?
Another thing just occurred to me that I don't think we've mentioned, and that is that Wendell is in partnership with other towns for its fire services and its police services.
Right.
New Salem and Leverett. And I don't know if that's somehow acknowledged in the hazard mitigation plan, because I think emergency services coming from police and fire would be from off-site in essence, and whether that causes additional concern or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we have, Phil and the rest of this team have reached out. We do have Joe Cuneo, who is on the fire department for New Salem as well as Wendell. on the line right now. And reaching out to all of your adjacent communities is part of our process of engaging stakeholders, including reaching out to the FERCog, which I think is how Kimberly got here. Kimberly, you want to follow up with that?
I wanted to mention that the Franklin Regional Council of Governments is doing a culvert inventory project for the town of Wendell. Now, these are drainage culverts related to roadway drainage. They're not culverts that are subject to the mass stream crossing standards if they're replaced. So the work will not be done by the time you finish work on the Hazard Mitigation Plan update, but I would just love it if you could reference it in the action plan table as, and I can give you some language for that, just so that we can remind folks that if they did want to do some road drainage improvements, that they could reference this report, which probably won't be done until maybe towards the end of this calendar year.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Send me whatever you have and, a paragraph or whatever language you think we can use, and I'll put it in there for sure.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. That's a great resource, and brings me to the point of this plan will be relevant for 5 years. So we want to make sure, just as Kimberly mentioned, that we're including your resources that will you'll have access to in the future, as well as projects that you might want to do in the future. Daniel, you want to add something else? You're muted. I don't know if you know that.
Okay, yes, thank you. Could you send us or put somewhere a link to the 2016 Wendell plan?
Sure.
The multi-hazard mitigation plan? I mean,
I'll send it to Phil unless you have it, Phil.
I have the draft and I never got the final on my
I don't think
computer.
I have the draft as well.
Okay, then I
But-
can
Oh
send that.
no, that's terrible.
I don't
This is
know that
Kimberly.
we have the final. I'll look what we have, but I feel like it's the drafts, but I can
Well, and I'm
double
sure the
check.
draft isn't a whole lot different from the final, but I can who should I send the final copy to? Should I send it to Phil?
Sure.
That'd be great. I can distribute. It's phil.delory@gmail.
Oh, I have the final, adopted June 1st, 2016. So
Okay.
I can send it on, Kimberly. It's okay.
Okay, great.
I'll make sure that they have it. Yeah, we got it from the state.
Okay.
so
Is it
that,
something that I should copy to post to the website? If so, you could copy me on that email and I can post it.
Okay.
and that, I guess the other question I have is, what are ultimately the benefits to the town of Wendell for preparing this plan? By having this plan, will we be able to participate in grant funding in the future for mitigation?
Yes, yes. And that goes back to one of those first slides I showed you, was the list of FEMA funding sources, but there are others. So yes, in order to access specifically those FEMA funds, you need to have the hazard mitigation plan. And it's part of the state requirement with some of those MVP funds that you have a current hazard mitigation plan to access MVP funds.
Okay,
Did that answer your question?
it does, thank you.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions?
I guess, Jamie, I'm still stuck way back a half hour ago. You said plenty of funding around for culverts.
I
I have
knew
to
that
tell
would
you,
come
I've
back to haunt me.
I've been chasing money for a culvert repair job that we're gonna spend town resources in excess of $500,000. And I've, grant applications and other resources we've researched, and it isn't showing up, at least from where I've looked. So
You
I
should, I
don't-
think you should be able to get some of the money through the MVP. I don't know if you want to collaborate with Daniel on that, because he said he was doing some MVP grant requests, but we can also put it into this plan, whatever you have.
And who is it to collaborate with who?
Daniel Leahy, am I pronouncing that
Oh,
right?
Dan.
Yeah.
Dan Leahy, yeah.
I've been, Phil, that was the grant I'm working on too, for the solar and storage. So we had talked about doing that earlier this year. I don't know if Dan is doing, are you doing
No.
anything?
No. No, look, we just voted the other night at the special town meeting to
Right.
come up with some match for MVP work, the solar on the rooftop and some battery storage. Is that correct, Lori?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
I guess my point, Jamie, was if there's some kind of collaboration training, part of the preparedness, to help us move forward, a little bit better research on financial opportunities, funding.
Okay. I will think about that. My one suggestion, just off the top of my head, is that to stay in touch with MEMA, because they're going to be aware of funding opportunities, as well as your MVP regional coordinator and the FERCog. So those would be the three places that I would really make sure you reach out quarterly and say, we still want to do this project. Do you have anything in mind? Because those three places, they're going to really have an eye on what's available.
Great, thank you.
Yep, no problem, no problem. All right, well, unless anybody has anything else, we'll wrap it up from here. This is my contact information. You are more than welcome to reach out anytime, shoot me an email or give me a call. Or if you're more comfortable, reach through Phil, who's my contact at the town. And we will stay in touch with you. The Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee will meet again, meet again next month. And we'll have another public meeting like this towards the beginning of July. All right, thank you all. I really appreciate your taking the time to participate. I know it's a nice day to be inside. Dan, did you want to make one more comment?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
You're all set? Okay. All
Thank you,
right,
Jamie.
everyone. Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good day.
Take care, Glenn.